Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Debunk the Funk. I am joined today by a very awesome and special guest, Desirée Townsend. Desirée,
Hi,
how are you?
everyone. I am good. Thank you for having me on today.
Glad to have you. So, you recently have been telling your story of what happened to you when you were younger. Basically, you are a survivor and of the anti-vax industry. And you told your story recently on TWIV with Vincent Racaniello.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, I was on with Vince, and that kind of stemmed out of an NBC news piece that aired earlier this month, just kind of covering and going over an update of what I've been up to and what has happened and the things that have transpired. It's things that transpired back in 2009 with the anti-vax industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I had heard your story before, but a lot of what you told on TWIV was really helpful to clear things up about what I had heard about you. So thank you for that. And
Yes. Yeah, would you mind sharing with the viewers what it is or what you remember from that particular time period in the story?
yeah, so I remember hearing about you. You were a someone who the anti-vaccine industry was using to say that vaccines had hurt you, had injured you. And I remember seeing like the videos of you trying to walk with Rashid Buttar, who recently passed away. And I remember hearing lots of things about it. I remember hearing that she's being paid to fake it. I remember hearing that you were genuinely injured but didn't know from what. And so hearing you talk about it really helped clear up a lot of confusion that I think at least I had surrounding.
Well, to go back to that, because I'm honestly curious. I was an insider at the time, so I didn't know what other people were thinking or feeling. So was this sort of a discussion that was, because you were in high school then, is that correct?
So I remember hearing about your story after I was in high school. Even more recently, like a few years ago, I remember hearing your story because I have a few videos about Rashid Buttar on my channel, and that came back up when I was looking through stuff. And even then, I wasn't clear on what the details were around your story. So it was helpful to hear.
Yes. Yeah, and that's what I took kind of a coward's approach for many years and just decided to hide instead of coming forward back into the public eye and clarifying the things that I had said. So now I'm becoming more vocal and active in trying to dispel vaccine disinformation. And a lot of that has come from me reviewing 40 hours of video footage that was taken when I was sick and I was receiving treatment from Dr. Buttar. And I'm watching these videos, and there's 6 or 7 men in a conference room. I'm not in there, and they're discussing media strategy about me, PR strategy, how they can spin it. We need to put her on the website. We need to send out a press release. We need to have a press conference. And not one person in that entire media strategy conversation, this is the anti-vaccine industry, how they work, not one of them ever thought and said, well, maybe she's too sick to be used in this form. And so after watching all these videos and watching how they were indoctrinating me, they even indoctrinated the videographer that was hired to take the video. This poor guy came, and within 24 hours, he was now anti-vax, had called his wife because his wife had an appointment to take their 2-year-old child to get vaccines. he called his wife and told her to stop.
Mm.
Luckily, she had already gone to the doctor's office and given her child the vaccines. But that is how impactful these anecdotal stories are. It almost down-regulates your logic.
Yeah.
And you go straight to emotion, which is, I think, what happened with my story. People just, their logic was gone. All they saw was this person who got injured, and they made this generalization that, well, if I have a vaccine, that's going to happen to me. Well, that is an absurd argument, because that's almost like saying, well, if I saw this guy who had an energy drink and he died of a heart attack. We don't make the generalization there that every person that drinks an energy drink, and all energy drinks are bad, that everyone's going to die of a heart attack.
Mhm.
But it's important that I understand what happened back there from your perspective, because I didn't know. I went and hid and didn't know about any of this, I didn't know how impactful and damaging my story was. And so I thank you for telling me that, because that was not apparent to me at all.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I think that, there has been a lot of confusion about stories like yours. And unfortunately, you get lost in a lot of it. Like, we hear about you and about your experiences, but we never heard from you. And so it's really great that you're coming back and to tell this story. And so maybe we can start just by talking about how you got sucked into, because you believed the things that they were telling you.
Back at the time, yeah, I did, which was absurd to me, because I had been getting flu vaccines for years, every year. It was just part of my healthy lifestyle. Go to the gym, eat fruit and vegetables, get a lot of sleep, and get a flu vaccine every year. It was not it was not out of the ordinary for me to get an influenza vaccine. So I got the vaccine, and then this symptomology kind of emerged around when they say potentially a vaccine injury could occur. I never thought it was the vaccine. Originally, I thought it was Lyme disease or a host of other conditions or illnesses. But it wasn't until a family member, who I think now, looking back at it now, I believe this person was anti-vax, and I just didn't know it, said it was the vaccine. And this person started really telling doctors that, and was telling me, they told you not to get the vaccine, this could happen, and really played up that it was the vaccine. So that planted the first seed. And then when I had trouble getting doctors to take me seriously and to actually run the appropriate diagnostics, I kind of fell out of the medical community and felt victimized there. So it set up this perfect opportunity for the anti-vaccine industry to come in and say, yes, it was the vaccine. And guess what? We have all these alternative, wonderful therapies that can cure you. And so that's kind of how I got swallowed up into it. And you had mentioned too, that back when you were in high school, you and that's kind of why we thought to even do this episode, was that you got into briefly conspiracy theories as well. And it's important for us to talk about that, because really smart, well-intentioned people can get pulled into things that they didn't mean to get pulled into, right? So I just was kind of pulled into this due to a vulnerability, but I think it would be helpful too if you can share about your story and how you got a little bit into the conspiracy theories when you were younger.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's something I've talked about on my channel before, but not a lot. But so many of my viewers don't know, but yeah, I totally used to believe in several conspiracy theories. It's interesting because in your case, you had a medical event and these circumstances where certain people were in the right place at the right time to find you and kind of unload all this information onto you and suck you in that way. But in my case, I kind of just stumbled upon videos on the internet.
Right.
Conspiracy.
That's how it
documentaries.
starts.
Yeah. And so I got sucked into the 9/11 conspiracy. And again, I was in like late middle school, early high school. So early teenage years. And it just snowballed. I mean, it started to be like all my friends were also believing those things. And I spent a lot of time just on the internet. If I wasn't watching videos about it, I was like trying to read about it, or I was arguing with people in comment sections on videos. It was very not a fun person, but that was my identity. I kind of built that for myself.
That's important. It was an identity.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And what comes with that identity is a tribe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have a group of people that also ascribe to that particular belief. And now you have a community, a tribe, right?
Exactly.
So do you think that also played a little bit in keeping you in there?
Oh, yeah. I felt like I had friends who I could trust because we shared those beliefs. And yeah, it was an accepting circle of friends. And so, but when people, didn't believe those ideas, it wasn't as welcoming. So looking back, that it's more obvious there. So, leaving that meant I had to also have people who could accept me if I left that circle to support that transition. And I know.
But you had that, right? You had the support group to get out of it. Basically.
I did, because when I made that transition from high school to college, you meet all new people. So
that's true.
In my case, there were a lot of things that kind of happened at the right time, and the right people came into my life to support that change. I had to do a lot of it myself too, but there were people there to support it. And it definitely wouldn't have been as easy if I didn't.
Exactly. And that's kind of where, I've been talking about the cancel culture mentality, because it's so rigid. It doesn't allow for flexibility in the change of thought. Or, for example, I understand now I made a terrible mistake in believing the anti-vaxxing propaganda. I understand that now. I went back to school to get a biochem and molecular biology degree. I know the science. I know my genetics to know that it had nothing to do with the vaccine. And I've now come forward and told people, look, I'm sorry. I made a mistake, but I grew. I became a better individual. Forgive me. And I will continue to speak out against the anti-vax industry. And
yeah, but
the response was unexpected. No, it was not expected. So, for example, the NBC article and the NBC video that's on YouTube, I was reading the comments and I was like just completely appalled. Here, I have a couple I'm gonna read to you real quick. This is what happens when you have someone that is trained to be a cheerleader, pretend to be a scientist. You see, I would have told her that people have died because of you. A whole generation was affected because of your lies. Lather that guilt evenly. Wow, right? I mean, despite the mental status of somebody who goes out of their way to leave a comment that is not constructive like that, it's interesting to see, because it actually goes back to this whole cancel culture mentality where there's no way to come back from it. There isn't. You did something wrong and that's it. You're done. There's no welcoming community on the other side. So when you have that, what are you going to do? You're going to dig in deeper to those false beliefs. And, here's another comment. So it wasn't just one person. There were multiple people that commented like this. Another person said, I was 25. I was young, because that's what I said in the piece. And this person said, you are already an adult capable of critical thinking knowing what is right and wrong.
Mhm.
So, first of all, I will argue that 25 years old is not a 25-year-old is not capable of critical thinking or good judgment. If that were true, I would not have had 2 ex-husbands. Right? So there's a reason why insurance companies do not rent to people under the age of 25 is because they even know you are a liability. But regardless of my age, this comment really makes it clear that if you got pulled into a conspiracy theory and you want to get out of it and come forward, you're going to have to be a brave individual, because people now on both sides are going to hate you and both sides are going to attack you. And that's not at all what we should be doing, especially the pro-vaccine movement. If we're going to actually make meaningful change, we have to be accepting of people with these opposing views, in so much that we provide education to them and we have constructive conversations with them. And when or if they do decide to leave the dark side, we should be there to support them and be that community for them. Otherwise, people are just going to dig in further. And that's what's great about what happened for you, is that you had this natural transition from high school to college. So you had people that did not know you at all. But what do you think would have happened if this was all over the internet and you tried to change your viewpoints on that?
Yeah, it would be a lot harder. I mean, I got extremely lucky to have friends and great teachers to help me realize what I was getting wrong in the little conspiracy theory bubble that I was in. And if you didn't have that, or if I didn't have that, it could have been a lot longer for me to come out, or maybe never. Who knows?
Yeah, probably never. Because there's another piece to this cancellation culture movement that's really grown in the past, 10, 15 years, is that you're not allowed the ability to make mistakes. You're not allowed to fail. And if you have a transgression, or you put out the wrong tweet, or you have a misstep, this society does not allow you to grow and evolve and come back and be a better person. You're ostracized everywhere. And I don't think that is constructive or helpful to not only individuals, but to society as a whole. Because like you said, if you didn't have that support group to get out of the conspiracy theory, you just would have dug in further. And I don't really, I'm slowly starting to build more, pro-vaccine people who are supporting me. But even then, they're still hesitant because they don't want to now get the wrath of the anti-vaxxers who are on me. Because apparently I am a narc now for the anti-vax movement. So I'm going to target on my head from them. And I still have people in the pro-vaccine movement who don't like me. So it's tough. It's tough. And so you really have to be a strong individual to go through that. But, it'd be interesting to hear your take on this. So what do you think about this? How do you think we could make this better? How do you think we could be more embracing of people who are in conspiracy theories?
I think that when you first brought up this idea of cancel culture to me, I wasn't sure where you were going with it. But after you explained it to me, and just now when you explained it again, it makes perfect sense. Because, if someone builds their identity around beliefs, they're going to entrench themselves in it once they built a community and have their connections that they need with people built within that bubble of a community, whether it's online or in person. And so they need to feel like they could leave it and not have everything fall apart. It's maybe an analogy would be like leaving an abusive relationship. Like you have to know that you'd be safe to leave in order to leave. And so I think now it can be tough. It can be really tough when things are so politicized and so charged, so
Yeah,
polarized.
and that's a very good point. Like, if you look at both political parties, and I vehemently hate both parties. I think they're both
I agree.
corrupt, and they're both they both have their own agenda. But if you, let's say you're a Republican and you ascribe to those beliefs, the political beliefs, a lot of other institutions will not allow you to work in there or to be part of their group. And the same with Democrats. If you believe in the Democratic that philosophy and those viewpoints, you're branded a liberal, and people won't allow you to do certain things as well, and they think that you ascribe to this certain mentality. It's so extreme, and it doesn't allow for any moderation or any flexibility. And it's a shame, because we are not allowing the other side to come out and say, let's have a constructive talk about this. Let's have a constructive conversation. We pigeonhole people into these groups. It's so much like high school, right? It's like, oh, you don't like Twilight? Well, you can't be in my group. Like, I mean, come
You're not wearing
on.
pink, you can't sit with us.
Yes. But that's
Yeah.
what it feels like. It feels like it's high school. And that's what this whole cancel culture is. It's high school.
Yeah.
It's, you did something wrong to Becky, and now you can't sit at the cool people's table anymore. Go sit with the nerds. And I'm trying to sit with the nerds, but they don't want me either. So
Yeah, it's a shame, because I mean, when you know, in your case, you had this medical event happen, and you had, I mean, you were emotionally, physically in that experience, and then you had people with letters in front of their name coming up to you and saying, "This is what's wrong with you, and we can fix it." Why would you not believe them?
exactly. Yeah, you don't have a choice, right? And that's where the vulnerability comes into play. And what was interesting too, in these videos, because I told you I've been in talks with several production companies wanting to make a documentary about my story and about the anti-vax industry. And so I've had to review all this footage, and in a lot of the footage, they had found my story. Generation Rescue had found me. I was in Dr. Bitar's office, and they're still looking for more people and more stories to pull in and to get into that sphere, and to have like another, punch another ticket on the card to say, look, another vaccine injury. It was just, it was unbelievable to actually review all the footage again. And it wasn't until I reviewed the footage this time around that I realized how used I was. I had no idea. I tried to just push that all aside in my memory, but watching these videos, like, it really broke my heart, because these people were in a room, 7 of them, doing a PR strategy about me, and I'm sick, and I am having my whole life turned upside down, and all they care about is parading me in front of the world like a monkey. And it just was so disgusting to see. So now I'm really glad that, I'm most likely going to sign with a particular film company in the next few days. But I'm really glad that this story can finally be told, because I think it's going to open the public's eyes to what this industry is all about. And what's really interesting is, in some of the comments too I've been reading, people have been talking about, oh, she's, supporting the pharmaceutical industry, and, they're a multi-billion-dollar industry. And I'm like, I do not have any idea how wealthy the anti-vax industry is. The only difference is, so the anti-vax industry, they found that the majority of the disinformation that came out of that is coming from like a dozen or so people, individuals. These are not companies. These are individuals. And they are the ones making most of the money, right? But they're the ones benefiting. They're the ones making the money. They're the ones putting out these treatments that scientifically don't work. Conversely, the pharmaceutical industry, they're actually making products that help human health, that have a scientific basis for it. And it's not like the pharmaceutical companies are all, the people that work there are all sitting there like, ooh, let's see how we can kill people today. They're not doing that.
No.
They're people like you and I who are just trying to make a decent living, enjoy what we do, feel good about how we're helping humanity. They're not sitting there toiling around thinking about how they're going to, injure people with vaccines so they buy more prescriptions. Like, no one does that. We're just people in a cogs in a machine working at a company. So it's absurd to even think that, but that's what they tell people. And people keep buying into that.
Yeah, and it's a shame because it taps into something real, because I think we can all agree that business, the way some pharma companies do business, is not good, and how that impacts the health care industry and the expense of
every industry. We can even argue social media. Look at what they've done. They're the ones that have really propagated these conspiracy theories. I don't think we'd have any issue with conspiracy theories or this political extremism if it weren't for social media. They know that they can hijack our attention by engaging us, enraging us. And that's what keeps people on the platforms, going down the rabbit hole and getting sucked in. And that's why I stayed off social media for so long. I don't really get involved other than posting stuff and leaving. That's really it. Because you can easily get sucked down that rabbit hole.
Yeah. So I think one thing that you mentioned earlier, you asked, what can we do to...
Yes, sorry, we went off track. Yeah.
No, it's totally cool. But you asked one thing we can do. What are some things we can do to change this, to help combat this, the cancel culture and also the conspiracy theories in general? And you said something earlier about how you were kind of struggling to get doctors to do the right tests for you before you got sucked into the whole anti-vaccine documentary thing. Can you talk about what your experience was at the doctor's office that made you feel like they weren't listening to you?
I think it's actually very typical for women. It's very difficult, and there have been multiple scientific studies and research into this area. Women are often dismissed in the medical community. And I think people just looked at my symptoms. They were bizarre because stiff person syndrome is bizarre. And it's, there's a lot of visual and audio triggers that can make the spasms worse. And so they didn't even think about that, and they just dismissed me. Again, it's a very, very rare disease. The only celebrity I've ever heard that had it was recently Celine Dion. So it hasn't really been talked about much. But they were completely dismissive of me. And as I mentioned on Twiv, the frustrating part was, okay, if it's me being crazy, I'm going to go to a psychologist. And that's what I did. And I'd go to the psychologist, I'd sit down, I'd tell them my life story, and they're like, there's nothing wrong with you. Psychologically speaking, you need to go back to neurology and talk to them. And I would go back and forth and back and forth. And it just became so infuriating and frustrating. And meanwhile, I am getting worse. My autonomic symptoms are so bad I can barely eat food, drink water without going into spasms. So I didn't have a lot of options. So when Generation Rescue came, I was all out of options. That was it. So I took that, and I'm kind of glad it happened, because I don't think any other person that they would have found would have done what I did and gone back and got an education and changed my mind, and then was brave enough to say, hey, I changed my mind. I messed up. I'm here to correct that. Most people would not have done that. So, it's just they take advantage of these situations, this anti-vax industry, and
so I guess if any doctors are listening, one thing they can do is listen to their patients more and believe
Yeah.
them. And
Yeah, and if you do have somebody with spasms, run an antibody test for GAD, glutamate acid, glutamate decarboxylase. Run an antibody. It's a cheap test. It doesn't,
Mhm,
it doesn't cost a lot of money to do, and you might be able to rule in or out that disease. So,
mhm,
yeah, unfortunately, it's just the nature of the medical establishment. But I'm hopeful with the um, with the progress we're seeing with artificial intelligence that someday medical diagnostics will actually be done with AI and not through doctors. I just think as humans, we are too biased to be diagnosing one another. I don't think we should be doing that. I think what we need to try to do is take scientific research. And this is going to be the toughest part of this, right? Because garbage in, garbage out, right? So however you train the AI is going to reflect your biases. So I think there's going to be really a need to find unbiased training data for machine learning in order to be able to make this an effective replacement or effective. I shouldn't say replacement. It's not going to replace doctors, but I think it'll help speed the process of diagnostics along. So hopefully someday that we'll see that in the next 5-10 years, because there's a lot of progress in the area right now. But honestly, humans are just biased. They implicit and explicit bias, and so that they may not even realize it, but subconsciously they're looking at somebody and thinking one way, and it's really hard to turn that circuitry off.
mhm. Yeah, totally. And so yeah, I mean, I could see the potential for that, and let's hope something cool happens with it. But
Yeah.
I wanted to also uh, mention, uh, your whole story now is that you said you were wrong, and
Yes. Yeah.
uh, I think that I think that attitudes in general need to change, both in society and also maybe take a lesson from science, at least what is taught in science, and it is that it's okay to be wrong in science,
Yes.
and
Thank you.
that is something that I mean, in my when I was doing my PhD, learning that you can be wrong was a very, very important lesson. But I feel like maybe sometime along the way, and I guess also in medicine too, doctors get to this, get over this hill of imposter syndrome and go to the other extreme of I am the expert and I do know, I do know what's right and what's wrong.
And that happens a lot in science.
Yeah, I mean,
There's
yeah.
no flexibility to change your thought process.
And even even like in my project, when I was doing my PhD, I spent maybe the first 2 or 3 years, uh, my advisor and I both being wrong about my project, and it was really tough. We were hitting a wall and just not getting the results we were expecting, and then it took us a while to get around it. But for those, for all that time, we were just wrong. We were looking at it the wrong way. Um, and looking back, we can say, oh, it was a challenging project. It was a challenging project and it took us a while to find the right answers, but we found the right answers. It's a lot harder in the moment in an emotionally charged and polarized topic to say, okay, what are we missing here? Let's step back and see if we can learn something. And then come out on the other side and say, oh, okay, this is where I was wrong and this is where I can learn.
Yeah, and that's it. It's the emotions. The emotions, like I say, stop us, down regulate us from using logic to. So you have a really good point. So the scientific process that should be applied to everything, including conspiracy theories. And I think we need to be open to doing research into those things, and really being careful in what research we are using or what sources we are using. Because even with COVID-19, I remember talking to people who are telling me these really crazy anti-vaccine conspiracy theories about the mRNA technology. I'm like, that's absurd. I've never even heard of that. And I'm like, and these people are like, well, I did my research. Well, how are you doing research? On YouTube? I'm like, that's not research.
Yeah.
You're going down the rabbit hole. You are not researching. So I think that approach to approach everything in life with the scientific method in mind, and to really put yourself in an unbiased scientific position to evaluate things. But it's just like you said, it's just as bad with lay people as it is with scientists, because if you're a scientist and you've been going one direction your entire career with this particular hypothesis and you're looking to make it a theory, it's really hard if you find something in there that disproves what you've been trying to prove for years to say, oh my gosh, I wasted all this time. I made a mistake. Now I need to change my trajectory. Very few scientists are going to do that. If anything, they're just going to dig in deeper and maybe cherry pick the data or do whatever they need to do to make that thing a reality. But that's what we need to try to get rid of and stop doing, is to allow our egos, to stop allowing our egos to determine what's truth, right? We need to use logic and the scientific method to really get there. But you're right. Yeah, science can be just as rigid in their thought process than lay people are.
And that's part of in my case, that was part of the problem with my project in my PhD for so long. Like, we had this idea as to how this protein should be functioning, and it just wasn't showing that way in our experiments, but we kept thinking, no, this must be important, and so we couldn't let it go for a while.
So what happened? And did you end up letting it go? So you had to discover something from the failure, right? What was it you discovered?
Yeah, it just turned out that this part of this protein that we were studying was important. It just wasn't as important as we thought it must be. And so through that, we ended up figuring out that one of the proteins it touches in this complex actually does the really important thing. And we were able to figure that out. So yeah, we had to look at it completely differently.
But that's what's important. Through these failures, we actually discover the truth, right?
Yeah.
So through me failing by believing in the anti-vaccine movement, I actually got propelled down this trajectory where I studied immunology, and I really began to realize that there's a lot of elements at play with autoimmune diseases, and a lot of it, I personally think, is due to our diet. The standard American diet is abysmal, and I think that is actually playing a large part in autoimmune diseases. It's just, if you look at other countries that aren't as heavily don't eat as heavily processed foods as we do, their rates of autoimmune disease are lower. So I think that is more to blame with the chronic conditions we're seeing in the United States, rather than, RFK saying, oh, it's the vaccines. No, it's the diet.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Yeah, it's complex. It's a lot of things.
It is. It's so complex, but until you fail, you don't realize that. And so that's why, this cancel culture where you're not allowed to fail, you're immediately relegated to the canceled club, is not working, because we learn so much from failure. We grow exponentially from failure. And it needs to be something that we're proud of, especially in science. Think of how much technological advancements we've lost because we weren't able to say, oh, yeah, I failed at this, but here's what I learned, right?
Yeah. And I think it's a principle that people know about, but maybe they have a hard time applying it, especially on the internet where
Mhm.
you are rewarded. Like you said, the social media algorithms reward you with more of what you want to see if it enrages you, if it gets you worked up, and you just sink in deeper to
Right.
whatever you already believe.
And then you're in a Reddit or you're in one of these communities, these forums, and now you've got a group of people and they're all, of the same mindset. So now you've got a community, and so it makes it really hard to get out of that. But
Mhm.
let's go back to that. So how can we as a society, as individuals, help people and support them if they do want to change their minds? I mean, because there's a lot of, and I've seen this a lot on both sides, the anti-vaccine side and the pro-vaccine side, where it's like, oh, the other side's wrong, they're idiots, they should never work in a job, they should never be whatever. How do we fix that so that we can embrace people and become envelop them in a new community when and if they decide to do that? What does that look like, do you think?
I think that's really tough, but you know, I think that it has to come down to a lot of these individual interactions that there are countless of every day. For example, I try to differentiate people who might be victims of misinformation versus those who are spreading disinformation.
Right. So the figureheads versus the people that are just, that somehow got pulled into it. And that's what you mean, right?
Right,
Okay.
right. Like the people who are looking to spread disinformation for their own personal, monetary, or political gains. Those kinds of people, I think, are a different story.
Okay.
I think if I'm interacting with them, then it's a completely different approach. But if it's someone who is a victim of the misinformation, who has been swayed by the figureheads, I think that has to be it has to be a much more empathetic approach,
You're right.
and it has to be more on the side of like, why do you believe what you believe? And like, ideally, if I were talking to someone who was just a victim of misinformation, I would want to know why they believe what they believe, any events in their life that led them to believe those
Yeah, how
things.
they get there.
Yeah, and just try to get to know them as a person. Um, the problem is that on the internet, that's hard to do, and it,
That's true.
like it, a lot of times it has to be this long process of trust building and uh, conversations. I don't know how to do it more simply than that, but that I think is
You're right.
an
Yeah, because
ideal answer.
that's what you would do at the individual level to try to get, you know, try to be supportive for people who are looking to get out of it, who are curious about, the other opposing views. So it's almost like there needs to be the creation of a forum or some sort of group where if somebody does have, questions or concerns, that there's a group they can go to and say, hey, I am kind of questioning the anti-vax industry and the movement and some of the things that RFK is saying, like, how do what do you, I kind of like this thing he said on Joe Rogan, like, how do we, so being there to, and I don't know how to do this exactly, but setting up some sort of outreach
Hmm.
platform where people can come and voice their concerns and be put in touch with a group that can kind of help try to answer that in layman's terms. But I feel like right now there's nothing like that. It's you're just being talked at by people.
It's yeah. I think right now it's kind of a hodgepodge of people who are doing these kinds of things like as a hobby. Like me, I do this YouTube channel
Yes.
as a hobby, and the one group that came to mind when you were just talking just now is there's a group called Back to the Vax. It's run by Lydia Green, and I don't remember the name of the other person, but it's a Facebook group, and it's a small support group for people who are leaving the anti-vaccine rabbit hole.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, and she has a podcast, and but she's the only one that I know of who has a community or a platform that has that design behind it. And like I said, it's a small community. So,
well, it might be worth trying to see if that's something that can be expanded, because I think that could be very, very helpful. And if it's the way you describe it, it could be a model for other conspiracy theories, right? So, from the 5G wireless stuff to QAnon, it could be used in whatever new conspiracy theories crop up after that. But I think that's as a society, that's what we really need to be doing, is have more empathy towards the people that are not the figureheads, spewing this nonsense, but the people who believe what they say, and just try to hear their point of views and see if there's, some sort of common ground we can hit, and, provide some of the science, because that's the other piece. When you're dealing with something as complicated as vaccines and biology, it's over a lot of people's heads. And I think, like I had said before on Twiv, the vaccine program has a PR problem, and there's the people of the pro-vaccine movement or the pro-vaccine establishment, such as like the CDC and doctors and scientists. They have this air of superiority, and they almost talk like that to laymen, to lay people, and it's very off-putting to a lot of people. So one, it's off-putting, and two, when you're just spewing science and you're only targeting your own group, you're only targeting your own demographic, the people that are already getting the vaccines. What they need to be doing is figuring out a more emotional or visual way of engaging people outside of science, so that they better understand. And then once they come aboard, then slowly try to bring in some science, or make the science so that it's visual and it's entertaining and it makes sense, right? Using analogies, because in college we took an entire course, one quarter, one semester, on how to communicate to lay people, right?
Really?
An entire course, and it was the hardest class I've ever taken. So I have a background in public relations. I worked at AOL doing internal communications and on the PR team, and so I have that background. But now I have this science background. And even for me to try to merge the two into something the general public would understand, it's really difficult. But that's what I think needs to be done. We need to stop having these scientists and academia and doctors, sciencing people on the news. It's not working. You're just hitting your own base. Like, what's the point in that? If you actually want to make a difference, you need to go after the people and try to engage the people that are sick of that it's not getting, the message not getting through to them. So figure out an analogy that can explain the science to them in a better way. So my hope is that, over the next few months, years, somebody starts rebranding vaccines, because right now it's a terrible branding that vaccines currently have, and it's not helping. It's making the situation worse at a time when we should not be making. We should be branding vaccines as something that's fun, right? That's healthy, that's sexy, right? It's sexy to get a vaccine, right? We should be branding it like that. And I think this is critically important, because as you've seen, the coronavirus keeps mutating. That's never going to stop. But the coronavirus roughly had a fatality rate of what? 2, 3, maybe 4% of the people that were infected.
Before vaccines, yeah.
Yeah, before vaccines, correct. So now you've got this avian flu that is all around the world. And
Yeah.
despite the governments and those in charge saying, "Oh, we've killed all the chickens that were infected with it." Okay, well, what about all the migratory birds that are dying in the largest death of an extinction event of it's ever been seen in birds? And it's everywhere, and we're just ignoring that. And we need to be doubling down on not only this disinformation, but we should also be looking very carefully at this avian flu, because if we learned anything from COVID, it's how important surveillance is. And I have really not seen much news coverage or scientists talking about this influenza, and it's already jumped into humans a few times. Luckily, it hasn't mutated enough to jump human to human,
Right.
but it's just a matter of time. So now we've got to tackle the disinformation on the vaccine side, and we really got to push vaccine manufacturers and the government to start researching this influenza and see if we could preemptively develop a vaccine, because it's everywhere now. We can't stop it. So it's just a matter of time before it mutates. And,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just my 2 cents. I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but I really think this is a big problem that we should be looking at.
It's something to worry about, because another pandemic will happen. And we already have a lot of people who have developed very strong feelings against anything that has to do with combating infectious disease. So
yes, and
it's
imagine
worrying.
if all of that happens again, if there is another pandemic that's much worse than COVID-19 was, we failed abysmally in managing that. We didn't have the infrastructure. We didn't have.
We weren't ready. Yeah.
We were not ready at all, and now it's even worse. And it's something that we really have to work on now.
Yeah. But you make a good point that we face a lot of challenges in that, because not only do scientists have to convince their peers on their grant review boards that their work is important. They have to convince lawmakers that their work is important so that science can keep funding those grants. And we also have to convince the public. And most scientists focus on the convincing their peers part and nothing else. And even that is hugely challenging for scientists. I'll tell you a quick story where I was talking about science communication to someone at a conference once, and they told me that at their program, in their department, when they give talks to their peers about their research, one little thing they do is they hand out anonymous review cards to the audience. And all it asks is, like, can you repeat back what the take-home message or what the point of the whole talk was? And this person was very surprised, because they thought that they worked really hard on their talk. They did a really good job. And maybe 15 to 20% of the audience understood or gave an answer that they were satisfied with. Like, yes, okay, this person got what I was giving. And that's their peers. That's their department.
That's bad.
So, but PhD programs, they don't focus on teaching how to communicate to lay people. It's an attitude that I think, well, partly it's an attitude problem, but also it's just it's not prioritized.
No,
it's not prioritized. It's not funded. So
and that's where I think the problem is. That's why I think this anti-vax industry, that's why they've had so much success, is because the people of science do not know how to communicate to lay people, and they just regurgitate the same science over and over again that people don't understand, so then they tune out and they just end up only getting through to the people who already believe in vaccines or already know the technology. So you're right. I think that's a large part of the problem is how, as you know, scientists, how do scientists and the medical community, how do you tackle this to where you are using analogies and tapping into people's emotions so that they better understand something that's difficult to even explain to your peers.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. And hopefully this COVID pandemic and all the misinformation that has run rampant, hopefully that convinces some people, some departments that this is something that we need to spend more time on.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what the exact answers are, but
Yeah.
in the meantime, people like you and me,
we just got to keep doing what we're doing.
We're doing this in our free time, just trying to make things a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, hopefully people will watch and, maybe it'll spur some action into trying to combat these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one thought, I guess, that we can kind of start to end on is, I heard about this concept recently of anti-experts. And what it is basically where if you were to ask people in a scientific field, like if I were to ask a bunch of immunologists, who are the most influential scientists in your field? And then I took a bunch of lay people and asked them the same question, who are the most influential scientists in the immunology field? I think that the answers will be very different. And especially like if I were to take anti-vaxxers and ask them who are the most influential immunologists, they would name specific people who have no influence to the actual experts. And I think that is something that just regular everyday lay people should maybe try to recognize, that the experts who live and breathe their field are going to know it a lot better than you. And some person who was a talking head on a news station once is not going to be able to speak for that whole field, no matter.
Well, that's true. And that's actually brings up another interesting point that is a bit frustrating about our society, is that we worship, not me, but the general public worships and idolizes celebrities, actors and singers and Instagram influencers. And that's unfortunate, not to downplay the work they do, but scientists, I feel, are more celebrities than these people. These are the scientists and doctors and these are the people, members of academia. These are who we should be worshiping. These are the people we should be idolizing, because they're the ones that are actually going to make meaningful, impactful change in society. And I think what you're saying is very true, is that, there's unfortunately a PR problem too with academia and scientists. They're just unable to get this notoriety out of the general public, because there's so much worship for other people in society who are just there to entertain us, really. So yeah, there's a lot here to unpack for the viewers, but we'll have to do a follow-up sometime soon and see if maybe some good suggestions come out of this from the community.
Yeah, maybe after you're done with the documentary, you can tell us about more of your experiences.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, that would be great.
That would be fun. Yeah. All right, Desirée. Well, thanks so much for joining me. And do you want to tell people where they can go to learn more about you and what you have going on?
Oh, yes. So I am finally on social media as of July. So you can find me on Instagram at Desirée G. Townsend. I actually have my COVID vaccine card on there and some other interesting information. So you can check me out there. Otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn, I guess, and that's pretty much it.
All right. Sounds great. Well, Desiree, thanks again for talking with us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks. And you take care, and good luck taking down the anti-vaccine industry.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.